The wind carried the dry scent of dust and pine across the open plains, where the sun beat down on the endless grasslands of the frontier. The year was somewhere in the late 1800s, and life in the old American West moved slow but hard, shaped by the land itself. In a small, weather-worn settlement tucked between the hills and the edge of Apache country, people lived on the edge of survival. Wooden shacks leaned against one another, horses tied to posts kicked up dirt with restless hooves, and men in wide hats squinted at the horizon as though it might spit out trouble any moment. This was a place where every choice mattered, where trust was as rare as gold, and where the line between enemy and ally blurred in the light of desperation. It was in this setting that a cowboy sat in silence, his boots planted firm on the porch of a broken-down cabin. His rifle leaned against the wall within reach, though he hadn't touched it. His eyes, sharp from years of watching both cattle and men, studied the woman in front of him. She was unlike any woman he had ever seen, strong and scarred by the wilderness, yet carrying herself with a quiet fire that demanded attention. Her skin carried the warmth of the desert sun. Her dark braids fell loose against her shoulders. Her eyes, though hardened by struggle, flickered with a plea that carried more weight than words alone could. She was Apache-born, of a people the settlers spoke of with equal parts fear and respect. She raised her hand, not in anger, not in defiance, but with a single finger pointing upward as if making a vow to the sky. Her voice, low but steady, broke the silence. "Let me stay here," she said, her accent thick, but her words clear. "And I'll give you what no white woman can." It was not just a bargain she offered, but a promise of something unspoken, something caught between survival, loyalty, and a fire the cowboy had never known. The moment tightened in the air, heavy with the weight of two worlds colliding. The cowboy leaned back in his chair, his jaw set, his weathered face unreadable. He had seen many things: raids, betrayals, deals made in desperation, but never had he been faced with this. He knew the risks. Allowing an Apache woman into the settlement could bring suspicion, anger, even danger. The people in town wouldn't take kindly to it. They would call her savage, whisper of curses, and some might even take up arms to drive her out. Yet as he looked at her, he felt a pull he couldn't shake. There was something in her eyes that spoke of truth, of strength, and of a kind of loyalty he had never been offered before. The land itself seemed to listen as the two stared at each other, locked in a silence thick enough to cut. The wind rattled the boards of the shack, a hawk circled above, and in the distance, the faint drumming of hooves echoed off the canyon walls. Danger was never far on the frontier, whether it came in the form of raiders, outlaws, or the raw hunger of the land itself. And now, sitting before him, was a woman who carried both danger and promise in equal measure. She lowered her hands slowly, her voice softer now, but no less urgent. "I can guide you," she said. "I can teach you what your people do not see. The land, the sky, the signs in the earth, these things your women do not know. Let me stay, and you will live. Refuse, and death will come. Sooner than you think." Her words held no threat, only certainty, as if she were speaking a truth written into the soil itself. The cowboy shifted in his chair, his hand brushing against the handle of his revolver, though he didn't draw it. He wasn't afraid of her, not exactly, but he feared what her presence meant, the choice he would have to make. He remembered the faces of men he had buried, the women who turned away when times grew hard, the countless miles of empty trail that had led him here. He thought of the settlers in town, of their narrow eyes and sharper tongues, and how quickly they could turn against him if he brought her back. But he also thought of the nights under the stars, of the loneliness that gnawed deeper than hunger, and of the possibility, just the possibility, that she was right. The woman's shoulders rose and fell with steady breath, her gaze never leaving his. She had risked much to come here, crossing lines drawn by war and blood. Her people would call her traitor. His people would call her enemy. Yet here she was, kneeling before him, not as a warrior, but as someone offering him something more. It wasn't just survival, she promised. It was belonging. A bond forged in the fire of hardship. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its call long and mournful. The cowboy's eyes flicked toward the horizon, then back to the woman. The world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, caught in a moment that could change everything. He could send her away, let the dust swallow her and carry on as before. Or he could let her stay, take the risk, step into a path no man he knew had dared to walk. The choice hung in the air, heavy as the loaded gun at his side. She waited, her hands resting on her knees, her face set, but her eyes searching his for an answer. For a heartbeat, the silence stretched so long it felt like the earth itself had stopped breathing. And then, before he could speak, the sound of distant voices rose on the windmen's voices. Sharp and angry, carried from the edge of the plains. The cowboy's hand froze above his revolver. The woman turned her head toward the sound, her eyes narrowing, and then back to him. Whatever choice he thought he had. It was about to be tested faster than either of them expected. The voices grew closer, the horses faster. Dust rose in the distance like a storm. And as the cowboy stood, his hand finally closing around the cold steel of his weapon, the Apache woman whispered, almost too soft for him to hear, "Now you will see." The riders came fast, their silhouettes rising out of the dust like shadows made flesh. The cowboy's hand stayed steady on the revolver, but his heart beat a little harder now. He had seen such men before, the kind who carried no law but their own, who drifted from town to town, leaving broken things in their wake. Their voices were harsh, thrown out over the dry air, carrying words he could not yet make out. But he knew enough. Trouble was coming. The Apache woman rose slowly from the dirt floor, her body tense, but her expression calm. She had not flinched when the voices cut through the stillness. Instead, she lifted her chin and narrowed her eyes toward the horizon, like one who had long ago accepted that the world was made of enemies waiting at the edge of the firelight. She whispered something under her breath, words in her own tongue, a prayer or perhaps a warning, before turning back to the cowboy. "Not them," she said softly. "Not your people. These men belong to no one. They are wolves that walk on two legs." The cowboy's jaw tightened. He had thought as much. Outlaws thrived in these parts, feeding off fear, taking what they wanted from settlements too weak to defend themselves. A woman like her, alone in the open, would be prey to them. And a man like him, sitting in a cabin without the numbers to stand against such a gang, was only a mark waiting to be carved. Yet her presence, her certainty, made the air feel different, as though what was coming was not simply another raid, but the turning of something larger, something tangled in both their fates. He thought of the townsfolk, just a half-day's ride away. They believed themselves safe behind their fences and rifles. But men like these riders could bleed a town dry before the law even heard the gunfire. And if word reached them that he had been hiding an Apache woman, he would not be counted among them anymore. No. He would be something worse than an outlaw in their eyes. He would be a traitor to his own kind. The woman moved closer to him, her voice low, urgent. "You do not know them like I do. They take, but they do not stop there. They burn. They break the ground so that nothing grows again. If you fight alone, they will bury you before the sun falls." The cowboy's eyes stayed fixed on the dust cloud drawing nearer. The pounding of hooves grew heavier, like thunder rolling in across the plains. He did not doubt her words. He had seen it before, settlements wiped out, families scattered, fields left to ash. Still, the question tore at him. Could he trust her? Or was this part of some greater design, a trap meant to bring him into ruin? But when he looked at her again, something in her expression cut through his doubt. There was no trick in her eyes, only fire and defiance. She had seen more death than she cared to tell, and she had chosen to stand here in front of him, instead of slipping back into the wild where she might vanish unseen. That meant something. The riders slowed as they neared the cabin, their shapes clearer now. 6 men, maybe 7, each one armed, their hats pulled low, their mouths shouting curses into the wind. Their horses, lean and mean as their riders, tossed their heads and kicked up dirt as they came to a stop. One of the men barked a laugh and spat into the dust. The cowboy stepped down from the porch, his boots sinking slightly into the dry earth. He rested his hand against the butt of his revolver, though he knew full well he could not take all of them if they chose to draw. His only hope was that they wanted to talk before they wanted to kill. The leader of the group, a broad man with a beard gone wild and eyes that glittered with cruelty, looked him over with a smirk. "Well, look here," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "A lone cowboy sittin' in the sun. Ain't often we find a man this far out without a herd or a town behind him. What's keepin' you out here, friend?" The cowboy didn't answer right away. He had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than words. But the Apache woman stepped to his side, her gaze locked on the men, her body tense like a bowstring drawn tight. The leader's eyes caught hers, and his grin widened. "And what do we have here? Apache stock. Well now, ain't that something? A pretty prize you're keepin' company with. Must be worth something if you're holding her so close." The cowboy's grip on his revolver tightened. The woman said nothing, but he could feel the anger radiating from her like heat from a fire. He knew enough of her people to understand that to be called a prize, a possession, was worse than being cursed. Yet she stood her ground, unblinking, unbroken. The leader leaned forward in his saddle, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Tell you what, cowboy. Hand her over to us and maybe we'll let you keep that cabin of yours. Maybe we'll ride on, no trouble. But if you think you can keep her from us, well..." He laughed again, a sound without warmth. "The buzzards will be fat before week's end." The cowboy said nothing. His mind spun, weighing choices that all led to ruin. If he handed her over, he betrayed her and whatever bond was beginning to form between them. If he refused, he invited death not just for himself but for her as well. And yet deep down, something in him had already chosen. Even if his lips had not yet spoken it, the Apache woman finally spoke. Her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the laughter. "You will not touch me," she said. "Not while he stands." The men roared with laughter at her defiance, their horses stamping the ground. The leader shook his head, amused but not angered. "Brave little thing, ain't she? Shame, bravery, don't keep bullets from finding flesh." The cowboy felt the weight of her words, heavy as the revolver at his side. She had bound him to her with that simple vow, casting the choice not as his alone, but as theirs together. He looked at her, then at the men, then at the wide horizon where the sun beat down mercilessly. For a moment, seemed the world itself held its breath. The wind stilled. The hawk above circled lower, its cry echoing across the canyon. And then the leader's hand twitched toward his gun. The cowboy's heart hammered in his chest, his finger brushing the cold steel at his side. The woman shifted closer, her hand hovering near the ground, as if she carried weapons unseen. The men's laughter died, placed by the deadly silence that always comes before blood is spilled, and then another sound rose on the wind. A horn, faint, distant, but clear. The riders froze, glancing toward the plains behind them. The cowboy's brow furrowed. That was no sound he expected. No horn from the settlers, no call from soldiers. Something else was moving out there. Something neither he nor these outlaws had counted on. The leader's grin faltered just enough for the cowboy to notice. The woman's eyes flashed with recognition, though she said nothing. She only whispered, their earlier confidence slipping. Dust swirled in the distance once again. Another group rising from the horizon. Whether they were friend or foe, the cowboy could not tell. All he knew was that the world around him had grown smaller, the walls of fate closing tighter. The choice was no longer just his. The land, the people, the dangers that prowled the ajizzle of it was pressing down on this single moment. And as the horn called again, louder now, the cowboy realized the storm had only just begun. The second dust cloud crept closer, its horn still echoing faintly across the empty plains. The outlaws shifted uneasily, their earlier laughter gone, replaced by the wary glances of men who suddenly felt the earth beneath them tilt. The cowboy's revolver stayed steady at his side, though his eyes flicked between the two groups. He knew enough of the frontier to recognize that when storms came from more than one direction, a man could easily find himself swallowed whole. The Apache woman remained calm, almost a calm, her lips moving in quiet words he couldn't catch. It was as though she had been waiting for this moment, as though she had known the horn would come. Her stillness unsettled him more than the riders did. He wondered if she was hiding knowledge, if her people were near, if the dust cloud belonged to them. And yet, when he looked at her, he saw no betrayal, only resolve. The outlaw leader spat into the dirt, his voice harder now. Whoever they are, they ain't ours. Might be cavalry, might be worse. Either way, cowboy, looks like you've got company. And I don't aim to be caught. Sittin' here waitin' for introductions. He turned his horse slightly, motioning to his men, but he didn't leave. Not yet. He kept his eyes locked on the woman. You hand her over now. Maybe we settle this quick, he said. Elsewise, when those riders come, we take her from your cold hands. The cowboy said nothing. He knew speaking now would only sharpen the blade. His mind raced instead, weighing every angle. If the dust cloud was soldiers, then the woman's life was in greater danger than before. Soldiers would see her as nothing more than a captured enemy, a savage out of place. If it was her people, then he himself might not survive the encounter. And if it was yet another band of men like the ones before him, then the plains were more lawless than he had believed. The woman finally broke her silence, her eyes never leaving the horizon. They are not soldiers, she said, and they are not my people. They are hunters. Men who sell death for coin. Worse than these, her words carried no fear. But the weight of certainty chilled the cowboy's bones. The horn sounded again, closer now, deeper, like the growl of something ancient. The outlaw leader cursed under his breath, his earlier swagger slipping. Bounty hunters, he muttered, always sniffing for blood. The cowboy knew then that the storm had grown larger. Outlaws at his front, bounty hunters behind, and the woman at his side who carried her own secrets. The land had drawn its circle, and he was trapped inside. The riders of the second dust cloud came into view, their horses darker, leaner, their formation tighter. Unlike the ragged outlaws, these men rode with a purpose, their rifles glinting in the sun, their faces set with grim intent. A horn hung from one man's saddle, swaying as his horse thundered forward. These were not drifters. They were men who tracked, men who followed scent, until it ended in blood. The outlaw leader growled, spurring his horse a few paces closer to the cowboy. You listen here. You've got two choices. Give her up to us, or let those hunters take her. Either way, she don't stay with you. His words were harsh, but his eyes betrayed his fear. The outlaws weren't eager to test their luck against hunters. The cowboy's throat tightened. He looked at the woman. She met his gaze, calm and unbroken. If you send me to them, she whispered, you'll never know why I came, and you'll never live to see the truth. Her words struck deep. He didn't know what truth she meant, but in her eyes he saw something larger than survival. Something tied to the land, to the battles that stretched farther than this dusty patch of earth. She was not just begging for life. She was offering him a path, one dangerous, yes, but perhaps the only one left. The outlaw leader cursed again, turning his horse back to his men. Fine, let the hunters have their sport. But when they're done with you, cowboy, don't expect us to clean up the pieces. He signaled his men. And though they didn't leave, they pulled back, forming a loose circle, waiting, watching. The bounty hunters rode closer, slowing as they neared the cabin. Their leader, a tall man with a scar that cut across his cheek like a pale river, dismounted with practiced ease. He glanced at the outlaws, then at the cowboy, then finally at the Apache woman. His eyes narrowed. She's the one, he said flatly. His voice carried no question, only certainty. He nodded to his men. Alive if you can, dead if you must. The cowboy's stomach twisted. Whoever she was, whatever reason she had come here, it was more dangerous than he had guessed. Men like these did not ride across the frontier for nothing. She was wanted, hunted, worth coin enough to draw both outlaws and killers. The woman stood tall, her hands loose at her sides, her voice clear. I will not run, she said, but I will not be taken. The bounty hunter smirked, though his eyes stayed cold. You'll come either way. Makes no difference. He turned slightly, his gaze landing on the cowboy. "Step aside, cowboy. You've got no stake in this. She ain't yours to keep." The cowboy felt the words strike him. No stake. That was the way of the frontiermen looking out for themselves, leaving others to their fate. It would have been easy to step aside, to let the storm pass over him, to save his own skin. But as he looked at the woman, at the fire in her eyes, he knew he could not. Something in him had already chosen the harder path. He drew his revolver slowly, leveling it at the bounty hunter's chest. The outlaws murmured, some laughing nervously, others watching with hungry eyes. The bounty hunter's men stiffened, their rifles lifting a little higher. The scarred leader tilted his head, almost amused. "You'd die for her?" he asked, his voice calm, almost curious. The cowboy's jaw clenched. He didn't answer, but he didn't lower his gun either. The silence stretched thick as tar. The hunters watched. The outlaws waited. The woman stood still, unflinching. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain, though the sky above remained hard and blue. And then, far in the distance, a third sound rose, a drum beat, low and steady, rolling like thunder from the hills. The Apache woman's eyes flashed, her lips parting in a whisper he barely caught. "My people." The cowboy's breath caught. The storm was no longer just two fronts. Now, three forces converged on the cabin outlaws, hungry for a prize, hunters eager for bounty, and warriors who would see him as nothing but an enemy sheltering one of their own. The land had set its trap well, and as the drum beat grew louder, the cowboy realized there would be no easy way out. Not for him. Not for her. Not for anyone standing in the shadow of this gathering storm. The tension pulled tighter. Each heartbeat another step toward the breaking point. And still, no one moved. The low drum beat rolled across the hills like thunder. Each strike carried on the wind until it rattled in the cowboy's bones. The bounty hunters froze, their eyes narrowing, and even the outlaws shifted in their saddles uneasily. The Apache woman stood straighter, her chest rising as though she drew strength from the sound. For her, it was not a threat, it was a promise. For the others, it was a warning that whatever storm they thought they had stirred was about to grow far greater, the cowboy felt. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck, though the air had grown cooler. Heavy with tension, he glanced at the woman, her face firm, unyielding, then back to the hunters who had their rifles poised and ready. Behind them, the outlaws whispered among themselves, arguing whether to cut and run or stay and wait for blood. It was as if the earth itself had split open, and all the dangers of the frontier had spilled into one place. The scarred leader of the bounty hunters raised his hand to still his men, his expression calm but calculating. "So it's true," he said softly, almost to himself. "They'll come for her. And when they do, they'll kill every man in sight who stands in their way." His eyes slid back to the cowboy. "That means you too, cowboy. You stand with her. You'll share her grave." The cowboy's revolver didn't waver, though the weight of the man's words pressed heavy against him. He knew the truth of it. If her people rode down from the hills, they wouldn't pause to ask if he had sheltered her willingly or not. They would see only that she stood with him. The land didn't care about the shades of truth, it cared about blood, and the spilling of it was close now. The Apache woman's voice cut through the rising murmurs. "They will not kill me," she said, her tone firm as stone. "And if you stand with me, they will not kill you either." The outlaws barked out laughter at her boldness, though it rang hollow. One of them leaned forward in his saddle, sneering. "She speaks like she commands an army. But look at our bare hands. No gun, no knife we can see. She ain't worth dying for, cowboy. Best hand her over before the hills spit out more than you can handle." The cowboy's jaw clenched. He didn't look at the outlaw, didn't give him the satisfaction. His eyes stayed locked on the hunters. But in his chest, the storm grew tighter. Each man around him was right in his own way. The hunters wanted their bounty. The outlaws wanted their prize. Her people wanted their own. And he was caught between them all, a single man with a single gun. Standing in front of a woman who claimed she could offer what no other could, the drumbeat grew louder, steadier, until it seemed the very earth pulsed with it. The horses of the hunters grew restless, stamping the ground, ears twitching. The outlaw leader swore under his breath, pulling his hat lower over his eyes. The scarred hunter gave a sharp signal, and his men tightened their formation. Rifles lifted, barrels gleaming in the afternoon sun. The cowboy felt the moment tightening like a noose. His trigger finger brushed the edge of steel, and he knew one wrong move would bring all hell down. Yet he also knew the moment could not last. Something would break soon. Either the hunters would rush forward, or the outlaws would seize their chance. Or the warriors from the hills would come crashing down before any decision could be made. The woman's hand brushed lightly against his arm, a fleeting touch, but enough to jolt him. He glanced at her. Her eyes burned with urgency. "Trust me," she whispered. "Do not fire until the ground moves. When it does, you will know." Her words sank into him like roots, deep and unsettling. He wanted to demand more, to ask what she meant, but the weight of the moment held his tongue. He realized then that she was not afraid of the hunters, nor of the outlaws, nor even of her own people. She was waiting for something else, something unseen but certain. The scarred leader's voice cut the silence. "We're done waiting." His hand rose, fingers curled to signal his men. The rifles lifted higher, aimed square at the woman. The cowboy's breath caught. His revolver snapping upward, but before he could squeeze the trigger, a cry split the air, a sharp, piercing shout from the ridge above. The sound was followed by the crack of movement, shadows shifting against the sunlight. Figures appeared along the ridge, dark shapes with bows drawn, spears lifted, silhouettes etched against the sky. The hunters cursed, swinging their rifles upward. The outlaws panicked, some fumbling for weapons, others wheeling their horses. The cowboy stood frozen, his revolver still aimed, but his attention locked on the ridge. The woman's face softened, not with relief, but with something fierce recognition. "They have come," she said. Her voice low, steady. The warriors' drums thundered louder, joined by a chant that rolled like fire through the hills. The sound shook the air, filled the canyon, pressed against every man's chest until it felt as though the land itself was speaking. The hunters tightened their line. The outlaws scattered in confusion. And the cowboy knew he stood at the edge of something far larger than a simple fight. The scarred hunter snarled, barking orders to his men. "Hold formation. Take the woman fast." Two of his men swung down from their saddles, moving quick toward the cabin. The cowboy shifted, revolver aimed squarely at them. He didn't fire, not yet. But his finger trembled against the trigger. The Apache woman stepped in front of him, her posture unshaken. She raised her hand, palm open, facing the ridge. The chant grew louder, rolling like a tide. The figures on the ridge held their bows, not loosing, not yet. They were waiting for her. The cowboy's chest tightened as realization hit him. She was not simply a hunted woman. She was the key. The reason the outlaws wanted her, the hunters chased her, and her people called to her from the ridge. She carried something larger than herself, something that could change the balance of the land. The scarred hunter cursed, drawing his revolver. Enough of this. He leveled the barrel at her chest. The cowboy moved instinctively. Stepping into the line of fire, his revolver aimed dead at the hunter's heart. His voice came rough, steady. "You'll have to go through me first." The hunter's eyes narrowed, the scar on his cheek twisting with the cold smile that spread across his lips. "Then die with her." The world hung on the edge of the gunshot that hadn't yet come. The hunters braced, the outlaws circled like vultures. The warriors on the ridge held their breath. And the cowboy stood between them all, revolver steady, the woman's hands still raised to the sky. The drumbeat quickened. The chant grew fierce. The horses stamped, the air thickened, and the cowboy felt the moment peak. The storm ready to break, but it hadn't yet. Not yet. The land seemed to whisper with tension. Every sound sharpened, every breath heavy. The climax had drawn close, closer than a heartbeat. But the resolution waited just beyond reach. And as the scarred hunter's finger began to close on the trigger, the ridge erupted not with arrows, not with spears, but with a roar so thunderous it drowned even the drums. The cowboy's eyes widened, his revolver steady, his heart slamming in his chest. Something was coming, something that would change everything. The roar that erupted from the ridge was unlike anything the cowboy had heard before. It was not the cry of warriors, nor the thunder of rifles, but the earth itself answering back. Horses reared, men cursed, rifles wavered in trembling hands. The Apache warriors poured down the slope, their chants fierce and unbroken, arrows raised, spears gleaming in the late sun. The outlaws scattered like startled crows, some fleeing into the plains, others too slow and caught by the rush. The bounty hunters held their ground, grim and disciplined, but their faces showed what their leader would not admit: they were badly outnumbered. The cowboy stood frozen in the middle of it all. The Apache woman still by his side, her hand raised as though guiding the storm itself. He realized in that moment that everything had led to this: her plea, her calm, her defiance. She was not just another wanderer caught between worlds. She was the reason the worlds collided. The scarred hunter leveled his revolver, determined to end it, but before his finger tightened, an arrow struck the dirt at his feet, the feathers quivering. He glanced up and saw the ridge lined with warriors, more than he had counted. His hand hesitated. The balance had shifted, and he knew it. The cowboy felt the pull of two paths stand: with the woman and her people, or turn aside and let fate swallow her. But deep in his gut, he knew he had already chosen long ago, when he refused to hand her over. His revolver stayed steady, not at the warriors, not at the woman, but at the bounty hunters who still threatened to claim her life. The woman spoke then, her voice ringing clear through the chaos. "Enough," she called, her words carrying across the plains. "This land has bled enough. Let it end here." The outlaws, those who remained, circled nervously. Their leader shouted, spitting rage, but his men had lost their taste for the fight. They pulled away, cursing, galloping into the distance. Only the bounty hunters remained, their discipline binding them tighter than greed ever could. The scarred leader sneered. "You think you can stop this with words? She's worth more than all your lives. Step aside, cowboy, or die where you stand." The cowboy's voice was steady, his tone carved from stone. "I've buried too many men who thought like you. If you want her, you'll have to kill me first. And if you try, the ground will drink your blood before the sun sets." For a moment, silence fell. The bounty hunters shifted uneasily. Behind them, the warriors' chants grew louder, the beat of their drums thundering like a heartbeat of the land itself. The scarred leader's eyes flicked between the cowboy and the ridge. He saw the truth then. No coin was worth the grave he was standing in. With a bitter curse, he lowered his revolver. He signaled his men, and slowly, reluctantly, they pulled back. Mounting their horses, the cowboy didn't move until they turned and rode into the distance, their dust cloud shrinking into the horizon. Only then did he lower his revolver, his breath coming heavy. The tension had not lifted, it lingered still. For the warriors were yet to move. The Apache woman stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the ridge. She raised both arms now, palms open, and the chants fell silent. The warriors stood still, their faces unreadable, their weapons lowered but not dropped. A man at their front, older, broad-shouldered, scarred with years of battle, lifted his hand in return. The woman called something in her tongue, words the cowboy could not understand. But he understood their weight. She was not pleading now. She was claiming. The old warrior nodded once. The drums stopped. The warriors melted back into the ridge, their presence fading into the hills as swiftly as it had come. The land grew quiet again, broken only by the restless snort of horses and the whisper of wind across the plains. The cowboy looked at her, his voice low, rough with questions. "What did you tell them?" She turned to him, her face softer now, but still burning with that inner fire. "That I chose. That I will not return with them. That my path lies here." He studied her, the weight of her words pressing deep. "Why me?" he asked. Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "Because you listened. Because when all others would have cast me aside, you stood. And because the land does not give second chances, It gave me you. That is enough." The cowboy felt something shift in his chest, something heavier than fear and stronger than doubt. He holstered his revolver slowly, the leather creaking. Around them, the cabin stood silent, weathered by sun and storm. But now it felt less like a ruin and more like a beginning. The days that followed were not easy. The settlers in town whispered when he walked through with her at his side. Some spat in the dirt, others turned away, their faces tight with judgment. But none dared raise a hand, not after the story spread of the stand at the cabin, of how hunters and outlaws alike had turned back when the warriors descended. Fear has its own way of silencing men. The woman worked beside him, her hands skilled in ways he could never have imagined. She read the land like a book, teaching him signs in the soil, the language of the wind, the secrets of the sky. Where he had seen only barren earth, she showed him roots and life hidden beneath. Where he had thought himself alone, she showed him that the land itself could be a companion if only one listened. The cowboy found his nights no longer haunted by loneliness. The fire crackled, the stars burned. And beside him sat a woman who carried both scars and wisdom, who had chosen to walk with him when every path pointed elsewhere. Yet he knew danger would never be far. Outlaws would hear the tale and seek revenge. Hunters might return, driven by greed, and the settlers would never fully accept what they could not understand. But for the first time in his life, he did not dread the storm. For the storm had brought him her. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, the cowboy asked her quietly, "And if they come again? If the outlaws or the hunters or even your people return?" She looked out at the wide horizon, her voice soft but certain. "Then we stand again. For this land does not belong to one people or another. It belongs to those who honor it. Together we can." The cowboy nodded, the truth of her words settling deep. The frontier had always been a place of struggle, of survival. But now, it was also a place of hope. Not the kind spoken in churches or written in books, but the kind built by hands and hearts that refused to give up. The story of the cowboy and the Apache woman spread across the plains, carried in whispers and in songs. Some called it betrayal, others called it legend. But to them, it was simply life, a life carved from the dust and stone, bound by choices made in fire and tested by storms. And when the wind carried the sound of distant drums, or the horn of riders on the horizon, the cowboy no longer felt alone. He had someone beside him who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. The land remained harsh, the days long, the nights cold, but for the first time the cowboy felt he had more than survival. He had purpose. He had belonging. And in a land where both were rare as rain, that was worth more than all the gold the hunters could ever promise. The frontier would remember them not for the battles fought, nor for the enemies turned away, but for the choice they made. A choice to stand together when everything else demanded they stand apart. And in the quiet of the cabin, with the fire burning low and the stars wheeling high above, the cowboy finally understood the truth of her words. She had given him what no one else could. Not riches, not peace, not even safety, but something greater. A reason to stay, a reason to live. And in the heart of the old American West, it was everything.